All right, let's jump right in. Today we're going to time travel back to ancient Israel. We're going to explore this big idea, the concept of atonement. We're going deep into Leviticus chapter 5.
Okay.
We've got some excerpts from MCS, Leviticus chapter 5, to help us unpack all this.
Right.
It really gets into all the details of substitution and sacrifice. So are you ready to see how even those, like, unintentional sins were addressed?
It's really wild how this chapter, it doesn't just focus on, like, when you deliberately do the wrong thing.
Right.
It also looks at those accidental slip-ups, the things you don't even realize you messed up.
Yeah, like failing to testify, or if
Yeah.
you touch something that, back then was considered unclean without knowing.
Yeah, and it seems like even sins you forgot about, you still had to deal with them.
It's heavy stuff. What do you think that says about, the bigger picture here?
It really brings up that idea of divine justice.
Yeah.
That God sees every action, even the ones we've forgotten, and there's a consequence. It's like a constant reminder that everything we do, someone's watching.
Wow. Okay, so how did people actually go about seeking atonement for these unintentional sins? Was there like a specific process you had to follow?
Leviticus lays it out in 2 steps. The first one is confession, admitting you did wrong,
Okay.
but according to God's standards, not just your own.
Right.
Then you got to make an offering, a female sheep or goat, presented by a priest
Oh, wow.
as a sin offering.
A sheep or a goat? That's a lot. What about people who just couldn't afford that?
Yeah, that's where you see how they tried to make the system fair for everyone, no matter their income. Couldn't swing a sheep or goat, no problem. 2 doves or pigeons would do.
Oh, okay.
One for a sin offering, the other a burnt offering.
There was always a way to make things right, even if you didn't have much.
Exactly. And if birds were too expensive, there's another option. 2 quarts of fine flour as a sin offering.
Barley.
The rest would go to the priests as a grain offering.
Interesting. Makes you think, though, did this really make everyone equal? I mean, even though there were different options, was there still, like, a hierarchy implied?
That's a really good point.
Oh.
Makes you wonder about those subtle power dynamics.
Yeah.
Even in a system that's designed to be accessible to everyone.
Yeah, definitely food for thought. It shows how societal structures, even when they're aiming for fairness, can still reflect the inequalities that are already there.
Absolutely.
We've talked about unintentional sins. But what about when someone, their heart's not in the right place, even if the sin itself wasn't on purpose, like if they're feeling rebellious?
Oh, interesting.
Did Leviticus have anything to say about that?
Leviticus 5.1416, that's where it tackles those situations where those unintentional sins, maybe there's a rebellious spirit behind them, particularly when it comes to service in the tabernacle.
So even if you're trying to do good, but deep down you're not fully committed, you
Yeah.
still had to make amends. It's almost like they recognize that tension between your actions and your intentions.
Exactly. In those cases, the offering was a ram. Or you could pay its equivalent value as a guilt offering.
Wow.
Plus 20% extra as restitution.
So the system basically said, even if you didn't mean to do wrong, your attitude still matters.
Right.
There was a real emphasis on owning up to your actions, the whole package. But what if someone genuinely didn't know they broke a commandment? Did Leviticus have anything to say about those situations?
Leviticus 5.1719 gets right into that. It's about those times when you break a commandment without even realizing it. Then you need to offer a guilt offering, a ram, or its value in money.
It's like the system understood that people can be ignorant,
Right.
but there was still a framework of accountability. Everyone was held to the same standard.
Yeah.
There's this theme running through all this, that forgiveness is possible, even for those unintentional slip-ups. But I'm curious, what did these offerings actually represent? Like, beyond their actual value, what was their deeper meaning?
That's where things get really interesting. Take the sin offering, for example. It wasn't just about giving a material gift.
Right.
It was this symbolic act, like you were transferring the weight of your sin onto the animal,
Wow.
acknowledging that you needed purification to restore balance.
That adds a whole new dimension to it. It's like the offering, it became this physical representation of what was happening inside,
Yeah,
like repentance and seeking forgiveness.
exactly.
So how does all this whole system of atonement, how does it help us understand the concept of justice and forgiveness back in ancient Israel?
That's a great question. It really gets to the heart of what we're trying to explore here. Leviticus 5, it goes beyond just listing rules. It's a glimpse into their entire worldview. It suggests that justice wasn't just about punishment.
Okay.
It was also about restoration, finding balance, and recognizing the complexities of human action and intention.
So it wasn't just blindly following the rules. There was real ethical consideration woven into the system.
Absolutely. And that's what makes studying these old texts so fascinating. They challenge our own assumptions about justice, forgiveness, personal responsibility. They make us think about how these concepts have evolved over time and how they still shape our understanding of right and wrong.
It's like holding a mirror up to our own moral compass,
Yeah.
making us examine our values and how we navigate those gray areas of life.
Exactly.
Speaking of moral compasses, what about the role of the priests in all of this? They seem pretty central to this whole system of atonement. What do you think?
They were absolutely vital. They acted as those intermediaries between the people and God.
Right.
They were the ones performing the rituals, offering the sacrifices, pronouncing forgiveness. They were the keepers of that sacred knowledge.
So they weren't just going through the motions of the rituals, they were like spiritual guides.
Right.
Helping people understand and walk the path to atonement.
Yeah, it makes you think about the role of spiritual leadership in our own lives today, whether it's religious figures, mentors, or even those close friends we trust.
That's such an important point, this human need for guidance, for someone to help us make sense of these big moral and spiritual questions. It's timeless. And it's fascinating to see how different cultures have come up with ways to meet that need.
Absolutely. It's really interesting how this whole idea of atonement in Leviticus
Yeah.
goes beyond just the individual's relationship with God. It also talks about making things right within the community.
So it wasn't just about like personal repentance,
Right.
but also about actually repairing those relationships that had been damaged. How did that actually work?
Well, Leviticus chapter 5 doesn't really get into disagreements about, what's right and wrong,
Okay.
but it lays the groundwork for this system of accountability that you see more of in other chapters.
Yes.
And throughout the Torah. Like there are all these detailed laws about making restitution, if you stole something or damaged property.
So it's about taking really steps to fix the harm you caused, not just saying sorry and moving on.
Exactly. It's about understanding that our actions have these ripple effects. They go beyond just us and God. They affect the whole community.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, atonement in this sense, it's about seeking forgiveness from God, but also taking responsibility for how we've impacted others.
This makes me think about how we deal with accountability today. Do you see any connections between this ancient system and how we handle wrongdoing in modern society?
Oh, definitely some interesting parallels. Think about our legal system, for example, with its emphasis on due process and restitution.
Right.
It has echoes of some of the principles we see in Leviticus. Even the idea of community service, where someone makes amends for a crime by giving back to the community,
Yeah.
that aligns with this whole concept of repairing harm.
It's pretty amazing to see how these ancient ideas are still relevant to us today. What can we learn from this system of atonement, even if we don't follow the same religious practices?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think a key takeaway is that emphasis on taking responsibility for our actions, both the intentional ones and the ones we didn't mean. It's a powerful reminder that even small actions can have big consequences. And seeking forgiveness, making amends, it's crucial for everyone involved.
This idea of acknowledging we're not perfect and actually trying to make things right, it seems super relevant today, more than ever maybe.
Yeah.
It reminds us that real accountability, it goes beyond just admitting you were wrong. It means taking concrete steps to fix the harm you caused.
Exactly. And it's not just about restoring balance out there in the world. It's also about finding that inner peace, that sense of wholeness, that comes from admitting your mistakes and actively working towards positive change.
So we've talked about atonement for individuals and even touched on its role in resolving conflicts between people.
Right.
But what about the priests in all of this? They seem pretty important to the whole system. What was their job beyond just performing the rituals?
Their role was really complex and fascinating. Remember, they were seen as the keepers of the sacred knowledge, the experts in the laws and rituals. They were the ones who made sure the atonement process was done right, guiding people through all the intricate steps and explaining what the law meant.
So they were like spiritual guides, helping people navigate this whole complex world of atonement.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. They were educators, interpreters, spiritual leaders, all in one.
This makes me think about how powerful rituals and symbolism can be,
Oh, yeah.
even outside of religion.
Absolutely.
They can give us structure and meaning when we're going through transitions or trying to deal with tough emotions.
Exactly. Like think about weddings, funerals, graduations. These are all rituals that help us mark big life events and move forward in a way that makes sense. They give us a framework for processing those moments, the happy ones and the sad ones.
And even if you're not religious, we all create rituals and use symbols to express how we feel,
Right.
to connect with something bigger than ourselves, or find comfort during difficult times.
It's a reminder that the human need for ritual and symbolism, it goes beyond any specific time or culture. These practices give us a way to interact with what we can't see or touch, to give shape to our deepest fears, hopes, and dreams.
Makes you wonder if we could be more intentional about incorporating ritual and symbolism into our own lives, even outside of a religious context, to help us navigate things like forgiveness, accountability, and making amends. Maybe we could create new rituals or adapt existing ones to fit our modern needs.
That's a really interesting idea. What if we came up with rituals specifically designed to help us acknowledge when we've hurt someone,
Right.
express remorse, and make things right in our relationships? It could be a really powerful way to encourage healing and strengthen our bonds with each other. But for now, let's get back to ancient Israel and those priests. Their position within the community, it carried a lot of weight, didn't it?
It did, and it wasn't just about their duties with the rituals, right? They were also responsible for teaching and interpreting the law, shaping how people understood God's will,
Right.
and guiding them towards living a more righteous life. They were more than just performers of rituals. They were the guardians of a whole moral and spiritual framework.
Exactly. They were entrusted with passing down knowledge, shaping values, and upholding the ethical standards of the whole community. Their influence went way beyond just the temple or the altar.
It's interesting to think about how the role of spiritual leadership has changed over time. Today, we have so many different people who provide guidance and support for navigating life's challenges. We have religious leaders, of course, but also therapists, counselors, mentors, and even those friends and family members who offer wisdom and just listen when we need it.
That's true. And while the ways we get guidance might have changed, that basic human need for connection, support, and belonging, it's still there. We all look for wisdom, meaning, and a way to understand our place in the world.
So as we move beyond Leviticus and ancient Israel, what bigger insights can we take away about the human condition and our search for meaning and atonement? What lasting truths about ourselves do these ancient practices and beliefs reveal?
I think one of the most powerful takeaways is that yearning for atonement, for making things right and finding wholeness. It's a universal human experience. It goes beyond any specific culture, religion, or time period.
Wow.
It speaks to a deep-seated desire for balance, connection, and a sense that things are right in the world.
It reminds us that even though we're all different, we share this common humanity, this common yearning for forgiveness, for healing, and for a world where justice and compassion are at the forefront.
Exactly. And while the specific ways we seek atonement might look different depending on our culture and beliefs, that underlying impulse, that desire to fix what's broken and live in right relationship with ourselves, with each other, and with the world around us, that's something we all have in common.
This has been such a rich and insightful conversation. We've explored the details of ancient Israelite law, delved into the symbolism of rituals, and grappled with those big questions about justice, forgiveness, and what it means to be human. I hope our listeners have found this deep dive as thought-provoking as I have.
It's been a pleasure sharing these insights with you and exploring these ideas together.
And to your listeners, I encourage you to keep thinking about these ideas, to talk about them with each other.
Yes.
And to find ways to put those principles of atonement into practice in your own lives. Until next time, keep diving deep.